someday there's going to be an analysis done about, in this country about deaths, injuries, COVID, and how that affected things like the economy.
Good morning, Roy. How are you?
All that.
How are you, Roy? Marlene? Man. Hi, Keith. We got Janet. How are you? Margaret, good morning.
Good morning, Ken. I was on mute.
I'm glad to see Margaret's here. We have David, Douglas Tilstra. My goodness, I'm honored.
Said his laptop.
Heidi, and Sharon, Tom Hayes, or Glenda, or both. Sure. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming. As I say every week, we start out weak in our attendance here, but it seems to gain strength in the next 15 minutes or so. So we'll go ahead and begin. I hope you've all weathered the week in these unknown waters that we sail and try to traverse each day now. We're all waiting for the good news of either a cure or a vaccine pandemic. I'm just glad that we've all weathered this thing as well as we have. And with that, and unless someone has an announcement or something they'd like to say, we will get going. Owen, would you mind having our current standing, please? Thank you.
Father, we are here to worship and Lord, you are worthy of our worship. We praise you for your name. We ask, Lord, that you be on the brings our verse this morning and guide us to it. Let us hear what you have us to hear. These things we say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Owen. Come in, come in. Good to have you this morning. Thanks for coming. This lesson today is really about dysfunctional families. And I know that you don't have those issues in your family. And I made a statement years ago after I began to get a little smarter, which is a big, tiny step for me, getting a little smarter. Every family has a Barney Five. Now you think who that person is in your family, but Barney's there. I've got one. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I get it. Thank you, Richard. I have an in-law, and he, bless his heart, all he needs is a badge and one bullet, and he would be our Barney Five. But you know what? This lesson today is how do we deal with that? How do we deal with dysfunction? We all have lived long enough now to have it in our lives. It doesn't matter if you're a teenager these days or if you're in your 90s. Dysfunction comes. Have you ever been shocked by someone's deception? I don't mean your kid stole a cookie or something. I'm talking about someone that you sort of trusted and you were shocked by the deception. It really floors you, doesn't it? I was going to ask you, do you know of someone who is deceived? I'm not going to get into who has deceived you. We've all been deceived, and I'm the poster board for trusted people. You know, and we've all been deceived. We've all been misled. We've all been lied to. But yeah, just a minute. Yeah, get ready for that. Who do you know that has deceived people on a large scale? Who comes to your mind on the big picture of recent times? Who has really deceived us who has really broken one off of the people.
You know, we just had an election. You realize we just had an election?
So depending on which side you're on,
Yeah.
you're gonna get two different answers. You ready for
We're
it?
having an election. Yeah, wow. Well, we only have an hour. We don't have a seminar of 90 days to get through that one.
Yeah.
We'd have to go in, different groups, and I would probably be out of gas before we got even through the first morning of that. But I wanted someone that really gave me a shock, and gave John a shock. John's in the financial business, financial planning. This guy is the Darth Vader of modern times. Pop him up there, Abner, if you would, please. I mean, we've had Ponzi schemes. There was actually a guy named Ponzi. That's where the term Ponzi scheme came from. And then I was kind of looking at this. There were some guys that actually sold the Brooklyn Bridge 3 times back in the late 1800s. One guy went to prison for it. I think one guy became the mayor of London after he sold it. And I don't know, but
It's fighting me as it always does, no big deal.
there you go.
This is
There we go.
This
There's
is
my
what happens
board.
when you log off.
Bernie Madoff. Bernie was pretty famous, what, 8 or 10 years ago, John?
Yeah.
And when the financial collapse came, Bernie was exposed, and Bernie was the darling of Wall Street. If you were a big party, I mean, with the people like the Trumps of the world, or the big Wall Street people of the world, or the heavy hitters, the guys with the big jets and then the little jets that could fly from the less important meetings, Bernie was at that party. Everybody loved Bernie. Bernie got 150 years in prison. Bernie built people out of $64.8 billion, 4,800 people. And here's the tragic part. He had deceived everyone in the organization, except for a couple of key people. His sons worked there, and I don't think they really knew what was going on. Both sons are dead.
One committed suicide.
One committed suicide, and the other's health failed like that, died of the car. So this guy really deceived, but you know who he really deceived was himself. 150 years in prison. Thank you. And this is not, I don't like the class to get into church passion. We're not going to do that. But Adventists, like Catholics, like Jews, if there's, you want to trust the people you go to church with. You just naturally want them. And it's a good thing. But once in a while, we'll have a con artist come through, and he will damage the people. I have a relative who, you make sure I didn't answer, I didn't call his name. But anyway, I have a relative who's in a certain business, and a man came to him and said, would you like to buy my business? And my relative was in the business. He said, I sure would. And he said, well, I gotta have $1 million right now, and I'll sign a contract with you, and we'll close it down the road. We're gonna have $1 million right now. So my relative scraped it up. It was a good facility. It was just one more problem. He already had a contract on the business. And it closed. Unfortunately, my relative was not the guy to close it to. So that happens in every religion, it happens in every society. But we're programmed to trust. We want to trust. That's such a great thing. Some people are programmed just the other way, and they're miserable. They don't want to trust anybody. So we have to balance this out. Again, what happened to my relative has happened to anybody that's in the Jewish faith, Presbyterian faith, Pentecostal faith. we want to trust, and sometimes we run into bad actors.
Look at the Catholic Church recently.
Sorry?
The Catholic Church
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah, that's true.
Big deal.
Now, this is sort of a rhetorical question. If you live long enough, but have you ever experienced alienation from a family member? And that's where we're studying. That's where we're going today. Have you experienced alienation from a family member? I have. And if it's someone you really care about, it is an extremely difficult position to be in. And then you think, well, how did this happen? You think back, well, how did this all come about? How was I alienated from this person? How did we resolve this issue? Or did it ever get resolved? You see, these are the hard things when you really get boots on the ground, everyday life. These are the questions that we have to deal with. This is not a deep theological class, nor is it a therapy session. I don't want it to become a therapy session. I didn't create it for a therapy session. This class was created for people who were about to leave the church, had already left the church, or people that just were hanging around looking for a different experience. Did you resolve the alienation? No, many of us have not resolved that. I was lucky. It actually worked. I thank God every day that I got my child back. Every day when I see him. So happy. All forgiven. I just got him back. Let's review for a minute. We're studying David. For those that are new here, I'd like to give you about a 3 or 4 week little review. And so you'll kind of catch up to speed with us and you'll know where we are. David, after running from Saul for all those years, 13 years, finally lands in Hebron. He is made king there, and then at Hebron, all the tribes come and they pronounce him king. Okay. He then moves to Jerusalem, the city of David. Everything is going well there. It is springtime. He usually goes off to war, but this year in the spring, he stays home. He is now wealthy. He is extremely powerful. He has about 8 wives that we know of. We also read that he took even more wives and concubines when he moved to Jerusalem. We know that he had at least 10 concubines, which we'll study about in about a week. All these for his sexual pleasure. All these because he was the king. One evening he can't sleep and he gets up and takes a walk on his roof or his terrace. And he sees this beautiful woman bathing, and he is stunned by her beauty. He asks who she is. He sends for her, knowing full well she's married. He forces himself on her. This wasn't one big love fest. Scholars believe he forced himself on her, and she leaves. A few weeks later, she sends word back to the king that she's pregnant. So, what to do? What to do? David devises a plan to have her husband, Uriah, one of the great fighting men of Israel, brought back from the battle. And that night, he wants him to sleep with his wife. And that way, David gets off the hook. Uriah will not go. He sleeps on his mat outside the palace with his servants. David finds out about this and has him dine with him the next evening and gets him drunk and tells him to go home to his wife. Uriah will not do it. He sleeps on his mat again outside the palace with his servants, like a good, loyal soldier. Things are getting even more intense now. So David works on another plan. He's desperate. He has Uriah, the husband, come in, and he sends a private note by Uriah to Joab, David's general. And this message is sent by Uriah. He doesn't know he's carrying his own death sentence back to Joab. The note is directed to Joab to place Uriah at the most dangerous position on the battlefield. Joab does as he's told, and Uriah is killed by the archers next to the city gate. David is now not only an adulterer, but he's also a murderer. Nathan comes in on the scene. At the time of mourning, 7 days after Bathsheba had been mourning for her husband, David brings her into the palace as his wife. All this time, David continues to be the judge over Israel, administering God's law. Think about that. The child is born. Then Nathan the prophet appears before David, tells him the story of the rich man stealing the one little lamb that the poor man had. David is confronted and he confesses. Nathan tells him he will live, but his new baby will die. Nathan also tells him that the sword will never depart from his house. He is told that before his very eyes, his wives will be given over to someone in his own family that's close to him. And he also said, you know what you did in secret with Bathsheba? I'm going to have this done to your wives in broad daylight. And it actually happens. All this will happen in front of Israel. The new baby dies. Then Amnon, the heir to the throne, David's oldest son, has this sick, passionate desire for his half-sister Tamar. This is the sister of Absalom. They have the same mother. Tamar is a virgin, and she's absolutely beautiful. Amnon, the oldest boy, with the aid and advice of his first cousin, Jonadab, devises a plan, and he rapes his sister Tamar. Then after he does it, he despises her and has her thrown out of his room. Her father, the king, does nothing, and Absalom hated Amnon from that day forward. Absalom, Tamar's brother, takes Tamar into his house to live there. He says nothing to anyone for 2 years. Absalom devises a plan to have Amnon brought to his home, and there he has him murdered. Absalom then flees to Geshur. He stays there for 3 years. And then we're told that the spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. How about that? You can't make this stuff up. What do you think? Absalom took off to Geshur. Anybody know? That was a safe place for him to head. Why?
His grandfather was king.
Sorry?
His grandfather was king.
Grandfather's king there. His mama was raised there. So he'll go to his grandfather till things cool off. His mother, let's see. Anyway, she's not a Hebrew. I don't think she's a Hebrew. Let's read 1 Samuel 14, the entire chapter. And what we want to do this morning, because it's a long story.
Is that Second Samuel?
Let's buy off chunks.
Second Samuel, right?
Yeah, 2 Samuel 14, I'm sorry. I'll read quite a bit. And when you chime in, don't read a sentence or two, a verse or two. Read quite a bit, because we're going to stop at the end of the chapter. And so once you get going, keep going for every 10 verses so that we can, we'll get through this. Absalom returns to Jerusalem. That's the name of the story. Joab, son of Uriah, knew that the king's heart, remember who Joab is? He's the commanding general. Joab, son of Uriah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa, and a wise woman from there was brought to him. And he said, pretend you are in mourning. Dress in mourning clothes and don't use any cosmetic lotion. Act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to this king and speak these words to her. And Joab put these words in her mouth. When the woman from Tekoa went to the king, she fell with her face to the ground to pay him honor. And she said, help me, O king. The king asked her, what's troubling you? She said, I'm indeed a widow. My husband is dead. I, your servant, had 2 sons. They got into a fight with each other in the field. No one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. And they say, hand over the one who struck his brother down so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother when he killed. Then we will get rid of the heir as well. They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth. And the king said to the woman, go home, I will issue an order in your behalf. But the woman from Tekoa said to him, my lord the king, let the blame rest on me, on my father's family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt. The king replied, if anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he will not bother you again. She said, then let the king invoke the Lord his God to prevent the avenger of blood from aiding to the destruction, so that my son will not be destroyed. As surely as the Lord lives, he said, not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground. Then the woman said, let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. Speak, he replied. The woman said, why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, he does not convict himself, for the king has not brought back his banished son, like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways so that a banished person may not remain estranged from him. Notice that, please. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways so a banished person may not be estranged from him. Okay, someone take it from there.
And now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. Your servant thought, I will speak to the king. Perhaps he will do what his servant asks. Perhaps the king will agree to deliver his servant from the hand of the man who is trying to cut off both me and my son from the inheritance God gave us. And now your servant says, may the word of my lord the king bring me rest. For my lord the king is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. May the Lord your God be with you. And the king said to the woman, do not keep from me the answer of what I am asking, what I'm going to ask you. Let my lord the king speak, the woman said. The king asked, isn't the hand of Joab with you in all this? The woman answered, as surely as you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything my lord the king says. Yes, it was your servant Joab who instructed me to do this, and who put all these words into my mouth of your servant. Your servant Joab did this to change the present situation. My Lord has wisdom like that of an angel of God. He knows everything that happens in the land. The king said to Joab, very well, I will do it. Go bring back the young man Absalom. Pick it up.
And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. Now in all Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. For the sole of his foot, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head for at the end of every year he used to cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. There were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Verse 28.
Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, but he never got to see the king. Then Absalom sent for Joab to ask him to intercede for him, but Joab refused to come. Absalom sent for him a second time, but again Joab refused to come. So Absalom said to his servants, go and set fire to Joab's barley field next to mine. So they set his field on fire as Absalom had commanded. Then Joab came to Absalom at his house in Miranda why did your servant set my field on fire? And Absalom replied, because I wanted you to ask the king why he brought me back from Geshur. If he didn't intend to see me, I might as well have stayed there. Let me see the king. If he finds me guilty of anything, then let him kill me. So Joab told the king what Absalom had said. Then at last David summoned Absalom, who came and bowed low before the king, and the king kissed him.
Great. I have a note here at the top of my Bible from years ago when we studied this, that David had been sick during this time. I just noticed it, I should have read it, and the note says Psalms 41 and Psalms 55. Apparently he's been ill. I don't know how severe. Maybe his emotional state had driven him physically downhill, I don't know. But just saw that. Why do you think Joab hatches this scheme with a young woman?
Well,
Big guy. You're a big boy, but your big pants, boy pants on that.
if you remember the past, Abner had killed Asahel. Whenever the two, House of Saul, House of David, started getting back together, David saw the opportunity of making Abner one of his generals and healing the wounds between the two houses to keep them from fighting with each other. But whenever Joab found out about it, he said, wait a minute, you killed my brother, and now you're coming in to take over my army. I'm going to put the balance to the So he killed Abner. So when David tells Joab to kill Uriah, Joab says, this is a way of being back in good favor with King David. So I'll kill Uriah. I'd rather kill Uriah than to remain at odds with King David because he's part of my family.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. All right, that's one version. It's interesting. I have a lot of thoughts go through my questions go through my mind. And maybe just discovering this about David being sick during this time, maybe you felt sorry for the king. Yes, sir.
Well, at some point, he's got to be thinking about who's going to be the next king.
Yeah.
Especially if David's sick. So maybe he wants to do a favor for Absalom, be on his good side, and have him be there so that when David finally succumbs, it'll all work out.
You know, I think one thing that was interesting, and Doug brought this out to me this week, not exactly this way, but as treacherous as Joab is, I mean, he is a killer. I mean, he's hard to kill. As treacherous as he is, and as heartless as he really helped kill Uriah. I mean, he did have him killed. He didn't have to. He could have said, he could have stopped that. He might have paid for it with his life, but he could have stopped it. I'm talking about Joab could have stopped it. But once in a while, the clouds kind of blow away and the sun comes out for everyone, I think, and they have a moment. Even as backward and dangerous as you be, once in a while, you have a feeling you really ought to do something decent here, never you?
I think Joab's goal, we keep watching him, and he's keeping the kingdom united. And here he's looking at it, he's like, okay, if something happens to David, we're going to have Absalom from Geshur claiming the throne. We're going to have another son from here claiming the throne. And we're going to have war against ourselves. And so I think part of it, it says in the first part of 14 that he knew David longed for Absalom. Yeah. So it's a way to get back into his good graces. But I think part of it too is that he's going, we don't need a civil war. So let's bring Absalom back before David dies. We have an heir apparent, there's no civil war.
As I don't want to get too far ahead of the game, but talking about Joab, on David's deathbed, do you know what he does to Joab when a new king is coming? He has him executed. we're jumping way ahead of the story here. But Joab really has a lot of baggage. And that King David has a lot of baggage. We don't really know exactly what went on when David was a mercenary wiping out villages back in the day when he was living with the Philistines. He was living in Ziklag, where he'd get up in the morning and he'd go, and the king thought he was going out and wiping out Israelis. Man, woman, and children. It's a tough life. Just a thought. Maybe once in a while, I was thinking, the last person that you expect in the world to step forward and help you might actually happen. The last person you would have ever thought that would actually do a very nice thing to help you shows up. It's happened to me. I'm thinking, wow, you're the last person I ever thought would come to my aid to support me. I think the key to this story, and Doug and I agree, is verse 14. But God does not take away life. Instead, he divides his way so that a banished person may not remain estranged from him. When you have someone that has been estranged from your family, it's a lot of stress. Maybe they need to be estranged. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who need to go, but it is very stressful. It is very stressful when someone's part of the family. What is motivating Absalom to reconcile with his daddy? What do you think's driving him? Yes, sir. Oh, you were done. Thought that was a hand signal. What's on his mind?
Well, didn't God say?
He's had 7 years now to work on it.
Yes, Bathsheba's had Solomon. And didn't Nathan say that Bathsheba's son was going to be king, that Absalom was to be king instead of Solomon? So I want to be nice to that.
Yeah, it could be. It's a good point. Let's leave that. Let's leave it right there. And let's move into the real meat of the study today. Let's go to, yes, sir.
I just had a thought that struck me. You take these people like David, okay? He's the king. God appointed him to be king. And he has children. Now, those children were not appointed to be kings or great people or anything, but they all go wrong. It's like when there's a lot of power, it just poisons things.
How many times you read in the paper, even locally in Chattanooga, about a very successful man who dies, and there's a huge problem with the heirs to the estate? I can think of 1, 2, 3, just like that, of people, a man who created an empire here in Chattanooga. 50 years later, their kids are all in court. I get this, he cheated me. She wasn't even here, and why should she get anything? She married him. She's just lucky to be here. She's not even a blood relative. You're just lucky to be here. It goes on constantly. One particular case is the wealthy man adopted 4 children. You know what I'm talking about? 4 children that were taken into this wealth. They're fighting like cats and dogs. Still fighting. So, let's read 2 Samuel 15, verses 1 through 12. And let's all join in and grab a couple of verses. And let me hear your voice. I'll start out with a couple. The title of this portion is Absalom's Conspiracy. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses, and with 50 men to run ahead of him. So we'll take it.
He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint, to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" And he would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, and there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that he gets a justice."
Uh-huh.
5, so pick it up.
Verse 5, someone. Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out, take his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel.
At the end of the 40 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and to fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. My servant was living at Ashur and Aram. I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron.
Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king of Hebron." 200 men from Jerusalem accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel of Gilead, David's counselor, to come from Gilead, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing.
Now a messenger came and David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword."
Okay, which verse are we on?
15.
Which one?
15.
15. Okay, let's stop there.
It sounds like our elections.
Well, let me ask you a question. I'm looking at Isaiah here. What if you were the most handsome man in the United States of America and you were wealthy? Now, ladies, what if you were dating the most handsome man in America? Or you had married the most handsome man in the nation? Yeah, very nice. Very, very good. So smart of them. I didn't see my wife raising her hand. Every day, this guy drove his Ferrari into the city and parked it at the first red light, where everybody would come from. All these poor people. We read about all the great wealth and all. These were poor people. This guy drives his Ferrari up when the rest of these guys are walking. Can you imagine how he looked when he stepped out of his chariot? By the way, nobody really had a chariot. You read back through all these battles, Israelis didn't really have that many chariots. The king had a chariot and a few other important people. This guy's driving the Ferrari and he's got 50 guys running in front of him. So everybody would notice who he is.
It would slow your Ferrari down to have 50 guys running in front of you.
Yeah, yeah. Probably the most beautiful horses, probably the most beautiful chariot, and I'm sure the 50 guys look pretty good too. Let's just look at me. Look at me. What kind of personality are you seeing here?
Selfish.
Narcissist.
Well, it's obvious I'm the most handsome man here. And that's without argument. I'm pretty smart too.
And I'll help you.
It was 7 years before he could see his father's face. If you're this powerful and you're this smart and you're this handsome, what are you thinking? 7 years before he sent his daddy. Let's talk about David for a minute. For 7 years, what's going through his mind? What do you think? How is he operating? Is he operating from guilt? Is he operating from shame or regret?
I would do that.
Fear? You got to remember that this is a government, and even though he's king, there are other powerful people in the region. Every time he judges and makes a decision, he affects somebody the wrong way. Every time you go to court, I've been fortunate enough to win most of the time. Every time you go to court, and I was forced to court, by the way, going to court is a waste of time. The only people that make any money there are getting one of the lawyers. Every time I win a case, it'll cost me, I don't want to talk about it. You don't win. You just stop somebody from doing something to you. It's been my experience. You win, but that's sort of a broad, we don't want to go there this morning, but you don't walk out of there and really feel like it's justified, but you did win the case. But for me, in my experience as a business person. Is he being proactive or is he being reactive? What do you think?
React.
David, if I was going to point the finger at somebody who caused all this, it would be David.
Yeah.
David didn't belly up when it was tough. He didn't, when Tamar was raped, he didn't stand up. There's so many things that he could have done to prevent this family from just dissolving. And so, I mean, Absalom at least tried to defend his sister, and I can't help but him thinking, Dad could have done something about this, but he didn't.
Oh, yeah.
And so, there's a thorn in his heart. And I think that there's a lot of things that happen that caused this chain to start unfolding, which makes me think, as the leader of my family, when I blow it, how do I belly up? How do I face the music? How do I prevent dominoes from falling? Because this is an absolute disaster, what's taking place here. The pain that has taken place because one man didn't have the character he needed to have. And that was David. So I don't know how he's feeling. I don't know if he's backpedaling, trying to cover his bases and ducking and weave, if he's been doing that for a while now. Or is he really trying to get some fiber about himself?
Yeah.
Well, I think David became a weakling and a coward, because as soon as he heard this, he told his people, let's flee. We're going to be killed by Absalom. And why Absalom, at that point, when David fled out of Jerusalem, didn't go into Jerusalem to take over the palace. It's amazing right there and then, because he could have easily taken over the kingdom.
Yeah. It is an incredible story. John Grisham can't compare this story to all of his books. You can't get there. This is a tragedy. Yes. What is it, number 4 for you today? Nothing I count.
Just keep counting.
Yeah.
David, it seems to me, he had to know what Absalom was doing all those years. He had people all over reporting to him. I mean, this wasn't a surprise. This was something that he was unwilling to try to deal with because of his guilt and all kinds of things.
Gordon, as a father of 4 children, the way I reacted when they were small, when they had problems, and your children have problems for the rest of your life, okay? You don't just, they graduate from college and they jump in their Ferrari and they live, that doesn't happen. I have learned through the years, I'm not saying David did the right thing here, but I have something on my desk in my office that I try to look at. A wise man once said, nothing. There is a point that the head of the family has to speak up. I try to wait on that as long as I can. There's a point that you have to move, and we're going to get into that next week's Thanksgiving, by the way. But very soon, we're going to see that the king starts acting again. But he is operating, to me, he's just hunkered down, hoping things will get better. It's a disaster, and he's not acting. I think he should have acted. I think he should have taken the ball. He should have, and I wish we had more information. Like Doug said last week, these stories are written 100 years or 200 years after they happened. We need more information, but it appears that the king is not acting like a king, nor a father. Here we have this son. Yeah, Richard.
I wonder if part of the reason he doesn't see Absalom for 7 years is because he knows Absalom was justified in what he did, and he should have done it. And if Absalom walks back into the throne room, whatever, where he's at, it'll be clear to everybody there that Absalom's in the right.
Yeah. Can you imagine back to Absalom and, well, here it is. Absalom begins to judge. And he's not going to appoint a judge. And his dad has to know this. I mean, his dad has people out there in the organization telling them what's going on. And so Absalom there in his beautiful chariot, his beautiful clothes, and his people come by, and everyone that bows to him, he makes them get up and he gives them a big kiss, puts his arm around them, and he acts like he really cares about them. And then he says, if only I could be made king. If only I could be president of this company at the cocktail parties. I've heard other people do that at Christmas after they had a couple of drinks. You know, if I could be president, or if I was running this section of the organization, and I'm thinking, yeah, I know exactly what would happen. It's not my company. We wouldn't have a company very long. If only I could be king. If only I could be made judge over the land. This went on for about 4 years. One administration, 4 years. And he's got it. He sold them on it. He's that smooth. Then we have the disaster that sets out. As the plot thickens, he sends for Ahithophel. Let's talk about Ahithophel for a minute. He's not mentioned that often. As somebody who hasn't spoken yet, do you know who Ahithophel is? Would you take a second to look him up? Ahithophel is the...
Grandfather.
Sorry?
He's Bathsheba's grandfather.
I'm sorry, say that again, Marlene.
Bathsheba's grandfather.
Bathsheba's grandfather.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, that's true. He is Bathsheba's grandfather. But who is he politically?
He used to be an advisor for David.
He is. He is like, some of you won't know who this is. He is like the Henry Kissinger of the day. He is the man that when the king has problems, Ahithophel was brought in. It said in those days, the advice of Ahithophel was like that one of inquiring of God. This man was speaking for God. That's how respected he was. And Marlene has also brought a major point here. He is the grandfather of Bathsheba. So what goes through his mind, the man with this great influence, watching David now failing? Marlene, what else is, what kind of baggage is Ahithophel carrying now? What kind of grudge would he have? What does he know?
Well, he knows what David did to his granddaughter. I think, one of the things I like about this class is the practical application. And can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
So I think what when Nathan brought David's sin to his attention, David repented with God. You know, he confessed his sin to God. However, David did not apologize to Ahithophel. He did not apologize to his children. He did not apologize to the people. And because of that, he suffered the consequences. And Ahithophel could have been David's loyal advisor, would he had been redeemed. That's my viewpoint.
Ahithophel is now looking at David and said, "You had my granddaughter's husband murdered. I know it. You've already admitted it. You had your wife killed. You broke that family apart and you stole his wife. I'm not over it yet. You did it. And it's really hard for me to move on. Seeing probably the continual mistakes that you're making now. It's a lack of respect now, it's gone. But Ahithophel was a big deal. If you needed to talk about diplomacy, problems, issues, he was brought on and he gave you advice, and you probably followed it. Let's look at the big picture here. We've bounced around on what we've seen here. Satan and Absalom. Satan and Absalom. How do you compare these two guys? Operationally. How do they stack up as very similar to you? What are some of the characteristics of these two guys?
Sure. If you hurt one of my daughters really bad, I could too. I'm capable of that. I know that about myself. I realize it. And so am I any better or worse? Well, I can make an argument I'm no better if I just said that. You folks that have children that have been badly hurt, what did you do? You did something. A lot of us. And what? So it makes me really reflect. You know, I don't want bad things to happen to people because of bad things that's going to happen to people because of that bad thing. And the world has changed for the worse. We have to be really, really careful. We've had generations impacted by this dysfunctional family.
Well, Satan was, so beautiful angel in heaven. He was. He's the most handsome guy ever. Very smart.
And the smartest.
And the smartest.
Just asking.
One thing that struck me, what do you think about this? Both wanted a throne that did not belong to them.
Yes.
If only I could be president of the country. If only I could be judge of the land. Both were very handsome. But this was one thing that was brought out to me. Both were convincing liars. They were liars. Both were undermining the one on the throne, or trying to. And both made promises they could not keep. Think about that. That's usually the problem with someone who starts this kind of movement. He makes promises, or she makes promises, but they can't keep them.
And they know they can't keep them, but we believe them.
Barney Madoff, apparently, I never met him, but you might have met him. He must have been the most charming, charismatic guy in the world.
Well, he made some people some money.
He did. He did. As long as the scheme kept going.
It was more, you know, it is a lot of money.
But both did not work in the open. In other words, they were working behind the scenes. They were gathering power from behind. And the goal is to kill the one on the throne. They were operating in tandem. You've got to kill the king. They will use people to get what they want when they really think of people having no value. The only value you have is to help me get where I want to be. Otherwise, I'm done with it. When I get it, I don't care. I just need to get where I'm going. And that's the way Satan has operated since day one. If only I were appointed judge of the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that he gets justice. Now, if you look at Isaiah 14, 13 through 15, it would say, Isaiah 14, 13 through 15. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will set enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mount. I, all these are I, will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit. That's exactly what we're going to look at. And verse 12 says, how you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once lay low the nations.
So now Absalom was the next one in line to be king, wasn't it? Yes. So Absalom was next to the line.
Actually, he really wasn't. There was he was the third son, if I read it right.
He was the second son of the king.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he could be. Yeah, that's right. Was that? Let me, I've danced around here long enough. Somebody have a comment before I get going? Can imagine. All right, quickly give it to me and John.
Well, it seems to me that this story is one of the best ones in the Bible about the nature of the human race and the big scale and God, like you were just talking about. Also on the local scale, in a political sense, and on the individual scale. We can all learn individual lessons. We can apply these lessons as we look at what's happening on a bigger scale in our country and in the world.
Thank you. John, quickly tell me your comment, and then I want to ask you some hard questions. Anybody can ask easy questions. Let's ask some hard ones.
David was sick, as you mentioned. He was sick physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah.
The last communication we had with doctors, Nathan told him that
That's
his son
right.
was going to die.
That's
Yes,
right.
he may have known all this stuff going on with Absalom.
Yeah.
God hadn't told him to make a move. So
That was
he
one thing that was
said-
brought out in Doug's lesson today was, what is he thinking when he knows all this stuff has already been prophesied is going to happen to him? It would make you sick. You know, it would make it sick. Conflict. Let's talk about conflict, because that's what's going on here, and that's what we've been dancing around here for the last hour. We got some real problems in the story. There's a big conflict going on. We now have a conflict between David and his son, and conflict is managed two ways, which I really enjoyed this part of what I discussed and what I was dug up. You can manage conflict or you can solve it. That sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? You either manage it or you solve it. It's not that simple. It's not simple at all. It's hard. My question is, Let me ask this question. You all have problems in your life that you're trying to manage before you have to pull the trigger to actually solve it. You told me a story last night. Tell me how you're managing.
Yeah, I'll read you.
This is a pretty good example.
We had, years ago, my grandfather in 1934 bought up a cherry farm up in Traverse City, Michigan, cherry capital of the world. It's located on Old Mission Peninsula. If any of you have heard of that before. It's a big tourist place. It's just gorgeous, right on Grand Traverse Bay. It had a mile of frontage on Grand Traverse Bay when we bought it, which of course it was just farmland. And before he died, he sold half of it for virtually nothing. And then there was a battle for the other half, and the family just got splintered because one aunt lied in court, and just some bad things happened. One brother and the other brother, aunt lived between them. They never talked ever again. Totally destroyed the family. And she took over the farmhouse. She took over all that land and lived there. Brought up 3 children that were, in my view, this is a terrible thing to say, they've been disasters. But anyway, but now the way we managed it was we really did nothing. They just were there, and we were keeping our eye on it. There was a lot that was sold right in the middle of this that my brother or my dad and my uncle was able to get in the estate. Didn't have any money, couldn't sell it because you couldn't build on it. It was too small. So the family went and bought it and got him some money. So here it sits right in the middle of this thing. Anyway, it's a mess. And 6 days ago, she got COVID and died 3 days later. So she died like last Tuesday. And so now these 3 kids are going to go to war. And we're going to sit back and watch the show because it will be an embattled family. And that's where we're at right now. I find it, I'm fascinated with it at this point, frankly, because I'm so sick of it. It's just great,
So you're just managing.
Yeah, I mean, can't solve it. Maybe we could have solved it years ago, but we just are managing it. That's right, we're managing.
The question this morning is God still managing Satan, or has he already solved the issue? I think he solved it. I did too. He solved it. He hasn't.
Yeah, not yet.
Not just yet. I would like
They just don't know it. The devil just don't know it. So,
Oh, he's going to solve it. He's going to come back eventually. He's going to solve it. But he's managing it right now. It will get solved. 2,000 years ago, it pretty well got done. But there's still one more little part that has to happen. And it gets solved. So why is God continuing to manage this mess? Why does he keep going?
He's patient with us.
He's
patient with us.
Yes, yes.
it's like the story of the guy that planted the crop. Somebody coming through weeds the crop. Can you hear me? Yeah. They said to Sir, he said, then go out and pull weeds, and he said, no, wait, harvest them all at one time. So that's what the Lord was.
Yeah. You know, Doug a week ago gave an example of issues with students. There's problems with some of the students. That's his job. He has to manage these students. Now, he can solve the problem as soon as he hears about what's happened with the kids. He can solve it. He can tell them to pack up and hit the road. But is that the right thing to do? He's managing these issues. Maybe he does have to eventually solve it. But he's doing his best as a Christian administrator to solve the problem. Are you managing your conflict with your son-in-law or your daughter-in-law? Are you managing it? Are you wanting to nuke it and solve it? Are you managing the problem with your child your daughter, you know, or you, or your wife, or your husband, or are you ready to nuke it? Sometimes you have to nuke it. But God is showing us about managing. I had an architect years ago who was drinking too much. I warned him. I even gave him a raise. He was a friend of mine. But I became impatient with him, and I solved it. Then he continued to, and I got done with it. Then he really began to drink. He drank himself to death 3 years later. Same thing now. Another architect, brilliant, absolutely brilliant, in charge of the biggest project residentially I will ever do. It's massive for me. He's drinking. He's brilliant. I can't risk him. I mean, he's a risk. He's been to the hospital and cried out of the institution, but I know he's drinking again. Now, do I solve it or do I continue to manage it? It might be you. It might be driving the drink. Unfortunately, he had this problem before he came to me. But he's brilliant. He studied in Paris. He's amazing. Do I solve it or do I manage it? You know, that's the big question. When we come back to the end of the story, to end it with what the lady from Tekoa said, but God does not take away life, instead he devises ways so that a banished person may not remain estranged. Richard, you give me your comment and I'm going to close it up. I want to tell you a story.
Kind of the same idea there, but I think God is still waiting because there are people to be saved. And that once we reach the polarization where those that are righteous aren't going across, those that are wicked aren't going across, and we've got, there's nobody left to save. I think that's the main thing.
I eat lunch a lot and breakfast at a restaurant that's on the first floor of our building downtown. It's called the Inside Restaurant. And they're very nice people. They're my tenant. And they have this, suddenly this little signage posted right here, and it says, "For God so loved." That's it. For God so loved. See it a lot. And last Friday, a week ago, went to check our dad into the ICU, and to get in to see somebody in ICU is tough. It's tough. Now the COVID is it. Because I knew this guy that knew this guy, they took mercy on me. And they said, "I'll get you in to see your dad. Get your mask on. But meet me at the emergency room." Okay, I'll say, okay, so I'll come down to the emergency room and I'll get you. We haven't been in an emergency room in 10 years. I don't have emergencies yet, you know. Not down at Irvine. I kind of bounced around out at Irvine Reese, but not at the main emergency room. So I meet him there. And I just left the Inside Restaurant. It says, "For God so loved." I'm standing in that emergency room, and I'm seeing this pathetic, poor, ignorant, pitiful bunch of people everywhere. Nasty, uneducated, hopeless, and they're everywhere. And suddenly I think, you haven't changed anything in 10 years. You're still the same. What is wrong with you? And then I thought about the sign in the restaurant. And for God so loved these people. I have a hard time getting my head around that sometimes. God is continuing to manage these people. It's unbelievable that he is still managing them when I would have given up decades ago. But to me, that was suddenly astounding. He will not give up on them. It's really shocking when you think about it. Because this is a horrible lot. They're very depressing. They're hopeless. But yet, I'm involved with God. Yes, no, I'm going to continue to manage them. I don't care what you think. I'm not done that. Well, I hope you're a little better off now than when you walked in. That's our goal. Next week, we'll be having our annual Thanksgiving lesson. Doug will be teaching it. He sent me the lesson already. I have it. I'm going to send it out to you this afternoon. Thank you, Doug, for that. I read it. It's a great lesson. And Doug will be teaching. But as you go out of here today, I hope you'll think about your conflicts. Are you going to manage them? Or are you going to solve them? And think about what happens when you solve them. Keep that on your mind. So John, what do you have with this?
I think I understand how you labored over this lesson. This was hard. And I at least believe that you really put an unbelievable effort into this. This was really hard.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody does get something out of it. I want you to know from me, Father, thank you for bringing us all in here today. Father, thank you for the gifts you've given, the gifts of each other. Help us understand when to manage and when to be decisive and solve. Help us understand that balance and the implications it brings. Have us work those things through you in your name.
Thank you for coming. Hope to see you next week. I'm going to keep asking you hard questions. Don't be offended. They're going to get harder. Thank you. Thanks, everybody up there.
Good job.
Thank you, Roy. Janet, Marlene, good to see you. Bonnie, David, Margaret, I hope you're there. Lynn, good to see you. No, I think it's good.